One time, a teacher was passing out a trigonometry test to his high school students. He said, I'm going to give you 2 tests today. One of them is in trigonometry, the other is in honesty. I would like for you to pass both of these tests, but I'm going to tell you the truth. If you don't pass the test in trigonometry, please make sure you pass the test in honesty. There are many good human beings who know nothing about trigonometry. There has never lived a good person who did not know anything about honesty. That sounds a lot like Jesus. But today's gospel does not. And I'm kind of shocked by that. Today's gospel needs some explanation. It's one of those that you can't read and then not talk about as the pastor, because you're reading something and just letting it float. And people walk away and think, is that really what Jesus wants for me? Okie dokie. You see, there was a rich man who had a manager who was not faithful with his riches, with the rich man's riches, not his own. He squandered them. The rich man was angry. He put the man, the steward, in charge of his riches, and the man didn't treat them the way he should have. So the steward realizes he's going to be fired, and what does he do? What will I do with my life if I'm fired from my job? Where will I go? Who will take me in? I know what I'll do. So he goes to every one of the men who owes his master money and says, how much do you owe? Cut it in half. How much do you owe? Make it only 80%. He's feathering his own nest, so that when he gets kicked out of his job, he has some friends who will pay him back. It's an entirely self-serving, selfish, backhanded, sleazy kind of way of making sure he had his future taken care of. The reality is, had he really wanted his future to be taken care of, he wouldn't have squandered and misused the money to begin with. Let's be honest. The easier thing to do would have been honest, and he wouldn't have worried about losing his job. But now, because he wasn't, he has to do this runaround and, to figure out exactly what it is he has to do to take care of himself, because he squandered the opportunities that were given to him. Listen to what Jesus says, because Jesus praises this man, and that's where I sort of go, huh? Like, this can't be Jesus. His master commended the dishonest servant because he acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth. What the world? So that when it's gone, you may welcome them. They may welcome you into their eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful in much. Whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest in much. I tell you this day, make friends for yourself by dishonest means. What in the world? Jesus has finally lost his mind. That's it, done. It's over. He's cuckoo. Let's just say the benediction and go home. This cannot be the Jesus that I know. And it isn't. Here's the story. Parables are not real, right? I may blow your whole theology here. I apologize. You can go to the Baptist now and be happy, where everything is just literal. Okay? But there is no prodigal son. It was a parable. No one lost a coin and searched all night for it. It's a parable. Parables are stories that Jesus told us to teach us a lesson, the moral lesson of which is in the story. It's not meant to be historical. All right? So if you're upset with that, the Assemblies of God are happy to have you next Sunday. It's a parable. It's meant to be that way. Now, Jesus lost his ever-loving mind. According to this, Jesus says it's okay to do whatever it takes to feather your own nest. Even if it's sleazy, do it. Protect your future at whatever cost. Wow, that's an alternative gospel, isn't it? It's one I've never heard before. And it certainly doesn't fit with the God of the Scriptures that we know. Because you see, it's not what the Scripture really means. Jesus is using a very, very typical rabbinical methodology. In that day, rabbis would often use things with their students to get them to spar back, or to say things that were particularly controversial to get their students to think and to spar. For instance, we see this with the woman at the well, where Jesus says, she says, well aren't even the, he says to her, what I'm doing is not fit for the dogs. Well, aren't the dogs even able to take some of the crumbs from under the table? And Jesus goes, you got me. He likens that woman to a dog in that story. And you're thinking, where's Jesus come from, right? It's that rabbinical tradition where the rabbi would spar with the student in such a way to get them to think and to say, okay, what you got? Let me teach you. Come back with something. And they do. Today in the gospel lesson, Jesus is using a metaphor not to be taken literally, but to get people to think about what he's saying and what it means for them in their life, so let's do it. The real meaning of the Scripture, I think, is found in this. The children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. Who are the children of light? They're us. They're people who have a relationship with God. Okay? People who attempt to be faithful. The children of this generation are contemporaries. The children of the world are more successful and put more energy into dealing with what's around them than my people do with dealing with what's important to them. What Jesus seems to be saying is, if we're as faithful in dealing with the riches God has given us as the children of God, as the children of the world are in assuring their own futures, we'd be a lot more faithful in our walk. We'd be a lot more successful in our life. I would say, as your pastor, a lot more happy too. But we're often not challenged to think about the results of our faithfulness. And I apologize if your toes get stepped on, but mine got stepped on writing it, so join the club. Okay? I'm not speaking as holier than thou. I'm having an internal monologue and inviting you in my own self-condemnation. We have an inheritance. We have a blessing. God has entrusted us with riches, and we are stewards. It's our job to manage God's riches in ways that are faithful to our job description as disciples. Let me give you an example. If you invest your money with an investment broker and you find out that you're getting 2 or 3% back, but the market's yielding 10 or 11%, what are you going to do with your broker? Hopefully fire him. Because either he's lazy and not doing his job, or he's just inept. But in any case, he's not doing what you've asked him to do with what you've given him, so you need to find somebody who's more faithful with your money. It's just the reality. If you don't, you're kind of stupid. Now, we're investment brokers of a sort. I'm using my own little analogy now. God has invested in us. It's our responsibility to do something with the investment. What is that investment then? That investment is our talent, our time, the gift of a relationship with God, the blessings of this life. I'm going to challenge you right now to all get really uncomfortable. How are you blessed? Do you ever really take a minute to think about that? There are nights I would look into my children's room when they were sleeping, and I just was overcome. If I could think of them as sleeping and not recharging, because they're usually recharging and not sleeping. But that's just part of having a child. Or when you wake up in the morning and you look into the eyes of the person you're waking up next to. Do you ever really realize how amazing life can be? Even amidst its difficulties, Rob and I will often say to each other, wow. And some of you know our stories enough to know, I'm not sharing secrets out of school, but both of us coming from single moms and having spent time on WIC and food stamps and all the stuff that comes oftentimes with single parents. Wow. Who'd have thunk it? We'd have a nice house. Nice cars. They're not BMWs, they're Toyotas, but they're nice cars. It's not the richest house in the world, but we're pretty proud of it. We get to go on really cool vacations once in a while. And we have amazing, amazing people in our life. Wow. Who would have thought from where we came? We're pretty blessed. Have you ever taken a second to think about the things that your life has given you? I would dare say that God has given you. If you've not, today is one of those challenges. Because amidst the difficulties, and there are difficulties, there are amazing blessings if we just take time to notice. And frankly, I find the way to get rid of difficulties in my life is by noting the blessings. What does it look like to get a good return on those investments? I think it means that we're faithful to the name we bear, and that name is the name of Christ. It means we're serious about what it means to be a witness in our world. Our faith isn't just something we parade on Sunday mornings or something that we use in our benefit whenever we go somewhere and there's a Christian discount. I don't know if those exist anymore. You see, I think in some ways returning that investment means being honest when we don't have to be. I have to tell you a story about my son yesterday because he put me to shame. He humbled me. My son called me a couple of days ago, and his nice car that he loves, that only has 90,000 miles on it, the transmission is going dead. $4,000 to repair his car. It's a lot of money. So we went yesterday to look for a new car, and we did what we needed to do, and Dad went with and helped him pick something out, because Dad needed to co-sign the loan. Dad figured it all out. We all got together, and he said, you know, Dad, I just can't not tell them about this. It's not right. I know I'm going to have to suck it up and lose a lot of money in this trade, but I can't not tell them that I know the transmission is dying, even if it's acting right when they test drive it. Wow. I was proud of my son, because there's a lot of people who wouldn't have made that choice. I think sometimes doing something with our integrity, doing something with our inheritance means being honest when we don't have to be, but when we know it's the right thing to do. They say that the character of a person is what you do when no one is watching you. I was a really proud dad yesterday. You see, I think also it means making a priority of our faith in ways that maybe others might not, or ways that aren't always easy for us to do. It means we support the church by our attendance, by our gifts, by our service. It means we try to use our gifts to help the community of faith. We have a very unique church, people. If you've not noticed, we have a very unique church. This is a faith community, and one of the few in the area that proudly says, I don't care where you are. If you want a place at God's table, you're welcome with us. That is said by a lot, but lived by very few. I think it's worth investing in our time, our talent, and our treasure. And in some ways, that's what the gospel calls me to do. It means that when I support the church, it's not just something I do out of what's left over, but it's a priority in my life. In the same way that my mortgage is a priority or my car payment's a priority, because this is a part of who I am. This place is important to me because this place makes me a better person. It means we take the high road when it just might be easier to take the low road. To make it political, and I'm not making it political, but there was a statement saying when they go low, we go high. That's what it means to be the church. When the world might want us to go low, we have to go high. What that means is when something happens at work and somebody thanks you for the job you did and praises you in a meeting and you know that somebody helped you with it, you don't keep quiet. But you say, thanks to so-and-so, give them a shout out too, because I didn't do it alone. There are people who wouldn't do that. But it means taking the high road, when maybe self-service means we take the low one. There was once a king who ruled a vast territory. When the affairs of the state became particularly unbearable, he would call for his little court jester to come in and make him laugh. The jester never failed to take the king's mind off his troubles. The king affectionately referred to the jester as his little fool. On one occasion, when the jester had returned the king to good spirits, the king gave the jester his scepter and said, "Here, take the scepter and scour the land and find another who is as big a fool or even a bigger fool than you, my dear little jester." The court jester traveled the vast kingdom for another jester, but he found none. But then one day on his search, a messenger of the king met the jester and found him and said he must return immediately. The king had taken gravely ill and requested his presence. Inside the royal bedchamber, the jester stood once again at the side of his king. "Well, my little fool," said the king, "I'm about to take the long journey." "My king," said the little fool, "have you made the preparations? Are you ready? Have you prepared for your journey?" "Sadly, no," said the king, "I have not." The jester looked down, handed the scepter back to his king, and said, "Then you, sir, are the biggest fool in your own kingdom." The children of this age, Jesus says, are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. Amen.